The wind screamed across the village like a living thing. Snow slammed against the crooked wooden houses, burying fences and swallowing the narrow roads that connected one lonely home to another. The people of the northern settlement had long stopped fearing storms. In the Taiga, fear was as common as firewood. But that night was different. That night, even the dogs refused to bark. Elena stood barefoot on the porch of her father's cabin, trembling so hard she could barely breathe. Snowflakes melted against her pale skin, while icy blood trickled from the corner of her mouth. Behind her, the heavy door burst open. "You are no daughter of mine anymore," her father roared. His face was red with rage and vodka. His thick fur coat swung open as he pointed toward the endless black forest beyond the village. "Go to the Taiga if you love monsters so much." The neighbors watched from their windows. No one intervened. No one ever intervened in family matters. Elena tried to speak, but her stepmother grabbed her by the shoulders and shoved her down the wooden steps. "You brought shame to this house," the woman hissed. "You should thank us for letting you leave alive." The door slammed shut. The lock clicked. And just like that, Elena was alone in the heart of the Siberian winter. The storm devoured her footprints within seconds. She wrapped her torn coat tightly around herself and stared toward the forest line. The villagers believed terrible things lived in the taiga. Hunters whispered about giant tracks in the snow. Children were warned never to wander past the frozen river. Old women crossed themselves whenever they heard wolves howling after midnight. But one story terrified Elena more than all the others. The hermit. Some called him a beast. Others claimed he was a murderer who lived deep among the pines. They said he never came to the village during daylight. They said wild animals obeyed him. And they said anyone who followed his tracks into the forest never returned the same. Elena had laughed at those stories as a child. Tonight, she prayed they were false. The cold bit into her skin with merciless precision. She needed shelter. Fast. The storm thickened, turning the world white and blind. Elena staggered forward through knee-deep snow, each breath burning her lungs like knives. Her hands had already gone numb. Her legs trembled violently. But stopping meant death. The village lights slowly disappeared behind her until only darkness remained. The taiga swallowed everything. Hours seemed to pass. Or maybe minutes. Time no longer mattered in the storm. Elena stumbled over a buried root and crashed face first into the snow. Pain exploded through her body. She tried to stand, but her legs refused to move. Panic flooded her chest. No, not here. Not like this. She clawed weakly at the snow, fighting exhaustion, but her strength faded with terrifying speed. Then she heard it. Crunch, crunch, crunch. Heavy footsteps. Not human. Too large. Too deliberate. Elena froze. The sound came closer through the blizzard. Her pulse thundered in her ears as a massive shadow slowly emerged between the trees. At first she thought it was a bear. Then lightning flashed across the sky, and she saw him. Tall, broad-shouldered, wrapped in animal furs darkened by snow. A thick beard covered half his face, and pale gray eyes stared at her with unnatural calm. The hermit, the man every child in the village feared. Elena tried to crawl backward, but terror drained the last strength from her body. The stranger stopped a few feet away. For several silent seconds, neither moved. Wind howled through the trees. Snow spiraled around them. Then the giant man slowly crouched beside her. His voice was deep and rough from years of silence. "You'll freeze within minutes." Elena stared at him in horror. He noticed the fear in her eyes. Something strange flickered across his face. Pain, not anger, not cruelty. Pain. "Can you stand?" he asked quietly. Elena wanted to say no, wanted to scream, wanted to run, but her body betrayed her. She collapsed sideways into the snow. The hermit sighed heavily. Then, before she could resist, he lifted her effortlessly into his arms. Elena gasped. His coat smelled like pine smoke and winter air. Warmth radiated from his body like fire. "Put me down," she whispered weakly. "You don't mean that." He turned toward the deeper forest, and Elena realized with dawning terror that she was being carried into the very place villagers feared most. The storm grew even worse as the hermit moved through the trees with impossible confidence. He never hesitated, never slowed. It was as if the taiga itself opened paths for him. Elena struggled to stay conscious. Several times she noticed wolves pacing silently between the trees, but none approached the man carrying her. Not one. At last, a faint orange glow appeared ahead. A cabin, hidden deep among towering pines. Smoke curled from a stone chimney. The hermit kicked open the door and carried Elena inside. Warm air slammed into her frozen skin. She nearly cried from relief. The cabin was surprisingly clean. Simple wooden furniture stood near a crackling fire. Shelves lined the walls, filled with books, dried herbs, hunting tools, and glass jars containing medicines Elena couldn't recognize. This was not the home of a savage monster. The hermit carefully lowered her beside the fire. "Don't sleep yet," he warned. He removed the kettle from the flames and poured steaming water into a cup. Elena's hands shook violently as she accepted it. The man watched her silently. Up close, he looked older than she expected. Perhaps 40, maybe more. A long scar across one side of his neck. Another disappeared beneath his collar. This was a man who had survived many terrible things. "Why are you helping me?" Elena finally asked. The hermit stared into the fire. For a moment his expression darkened. Then he answered, "Because someone should have helped you long ago." Elena's breath caught. "How do you know me?" He didn't answer immediately. Outside, wolves howled somewhere in the frozen darkness. The hermit slowly reached into his coat and removed something old and weathered. A photograph. He handed it to her. Elena's blood turned cold. It was a picture of her mother, young, smiling, standing beside the very man, now sitting across from her. And written on the back were 4 words that shattered everything Elena believed about her family. "If anything happens, find Victor." The fire cracked loudly between them. Elena looked up at the hermit with wide, terrified eyes. "You knew my mother?" The giant man closed his eyes briefly. Then he revealed the truth that would change Elena's life forever. "I loved her." The cabin fell silent, except for the crackling fire. Elena stared at the photograph in disbelief, while snow hammered the windows like frozen fists. Her mother looked genuinely happy in the picture, not frightened, not trapped, happy. That alone shattered everything Elena thought she knew. Her father had always described her mother as weak, quiet, sickly, a woman who died because life in the North was too hard for her. But the woman in this photograph looked alive in a way Elena had never seen before. And standing beside her was the man the village called a monster, Victor. The hermit slowly fed another log into the fire. "You should rest," he said quietly. But Elena's heart pounded too violently for sleep. "My mother never mentioned you," she whispered. "She wasn't allowed to." The answer came without hesitation. Elena looked up sharply. Victor's expression remained calm, but something dangerous moved beneath the surface of his eyes, like old rage buried under years of silence. "What does that mean?" For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he stood and crossed the room toward a wooden cabinet. From inside, he removed an old metal box covered in scratches and rust. He placed it on the table between them. "You deserve the truth," he said. Elena's fingers trembled as she opened the box. Inside were dozens of letters tied together with faded ribbon, photographs, documents, and beneath them all, a gold wedding ring. Elena froze. The inside of the ring was engraved, "To Sophia, forever yours." Victor, Sophia, her mother's name. Elena's throat tightened. "She was married to you?" Victor nodded once. The room suddenly felt smaller, colder. "That's impossible," Elena whispered. "My father said he married her before I was born." "He lied." The word landed like thunder. Elena shook her head instinctively. No, that can't be true." But deep down, something inside her already knew. Too many memories suddenly felt wrong. The way her father avoided speaking about the past. The way villagers went silent whenever her mother's name was mentioned. The way Elena herself had always felt like an outsider in her own home. Victor sat across from her. "They took her away from me." Elena looked into his pale gray eyes and realized this was not the story of a monster. This was the story of a man destroyed by betrayal. Years earlier, before fear poisoned the village, Victor had been respected throughout the region. He worked as a forest ranger, guiding hunters and protecting remote settlements during brutal winters. People trusted him, until the accident. Victor stared into the fire as he spoke. One winter, several men disappeared in the forest. The villagers panicked. Search parties found blood in the snow, broken sleds, animal tracks. Fear spread quickly through the settlement. Someone needed to blame, and Victor became the perfect target. "Why you?" Elena asked softly. A bitter smile crossed his face. "Because fear is easier than truth." The missing men had actually been smugglers using frozen river routes through the Taiga. During a storm, their sled broke through unstable ice. But by the time the truth emerged, rumors had already consumed the village. People claimed Victor spoke to wolves, that he walked unharmed through blizzards, that animals obeyed him. When panic grows in isolated places, stories become weapons. Then came the final betrayal. Elena's father. "He wanted your mother," Victor said. "And when the village turned against me, he saw an opportunity." Elena felt sick. Her father had once been Victor's friend. He helped spread the rumors, helped convince the village that Victor was dangerous. And while fear isolated the forest, rangered deeper into the taiga, Elena's father slowly manipulated Sophia into believing Victor would eventually be killed if she stayed with him. "She was pregnant when she left," Victor said quietly. Elena stopped breathing. The fire cracked loudly. Outside, the storm howled across the forest. "No," Elena whispered. Victor looked directly at her. "You are my daughter." The world tilted violently. Elena stood so fast the chair crashed backward onto the floor. "That's not true." But even as she said it, memory stabbed through her mind. The gray eyes she inherited, the shape of her hands, the fact that she looked nothing like the man who raised her. "You're lying," she whispered again, weaker this time. Victor didn't move. "I wish I were." Elena backed away toward the wall. Her entire life suddenly felt built on rotten foundations. Her father wasn't her father. The monster she feared all her life was the only person who had come looking for her in the storm. And somehow, impossibly, this stranger was blood. Tears burned her eyes. "Why didn't my mother come back for you?" Pain darkened Victor's face. She tried. He reached into the box again and handed Elena another letter. The paper was worn from years of handling. Elena unfolded it carefully. As she read, her hands began to shake. "Victor, he watches me constantly now. I'm afraid of what he'll do if he learns the truth about Elena. He drinks more every winter. Sometimes I think he hates her because she reminds him of you. If anything happens to me, promise me you'll protect her, even if she never knows who you are. I never stopped loving you. Sophia." A tear slid down Elena's cheek. Then another. Her mother had known all along. Every year, every day, she had lived trapped between fear and silence. What happened to her? Elena asked. Victor looked away. And for the first time since entering the cabin, the massive man seemed uncertain. "She died too suddenly." Elena's chest tightened. "What do you mean?" Victor hesitated. Then he spoke the words that sent ice through her veins. "The night your mother died, your father came into the forest covered in blood." The room went completely silent. Elena's pulse thundered in her ears. "He told the village wolves attacked her," Victor continued. "But wolves don't use knives." The fire popped sharply. Elena felt nauseous. "No." Victor's voice remained steady, but grief hid beneath every word. "I buried her myself." Elena could barely breathe. All her life, she had believed sickness killed her mother. Now another possibility crawled through her mind like poison. Her father had not only stolen another man's life, he may have murdered her mother too. Suddenly, a violent pounding erupted against the cabin door. Both Elena and Victor turned instantly. Another bang shook the wood. Then voices shouted outside. Men, several of them. Elena's blood froze when she recognized one voice immediately. Her father. "We know she's in there," he yelled through the storm. The cabin fell deadly still. Victor slowly stood to his full height, and for the first time, Elena finally understood why the villagers feared him. Not because he was cruel, but because, when the calm left his eyes, He became terrifying. Another voice shouted outside, "Come out, beast!" The men laughed drunkenly. A third voice added, "Or we burn the cabin with both of you inside." Elena's heart pounded. Her father hadn't come to rescue her. He came to silence her. Victor calmly reached above the fireplace and took down an old hunting rifle. The movement was slow, controlled, experienced. "Elena," he said quietly, never taking his eyes off the door. "You need to decide right now." The pounding outside grew louder. "What?" Victor looked at her, and his next words changed everything. "Do you still believe they're the good people in this story?" The pounding on the cabin door grew more violent. Snow fell from the ceiling beams with every impact. "Elena!" her father shouted from outside. "That animal has poisoned your mind. Come out now." The men with him laughed cruelly. One of them kicked the wall hard enough to rattle the windows. "We should drag the beast back to the village," another voice yelled. "No," her father replied coldly. "Dead men don't return from the Taiga." Elena felt her stomach twist. These were not frightened villagers. They came prepared for murder. Victor stood motionless near the fire, the rifle hanging loosely in his hands. His face remained calm, but the air around him had changed completely. Predatory, focused, like a wolf cornered one too many times. "Elena," he said quietly, "go into the back room." "No." The answer surprised even her. Victor looked at her briefly. Outside, the men began pouring something against the cabin walls. Oil! The sharp smell drifted through the cracks instantly. Elena's father shouted again. "Last chance!" Flames suddenly exploded outside one window. Heat flashed across the glass. Elena gasped, "They're really trying to burn us alive." Victor's expression darkened, though not from fear, from disappointment. "They've done this before," he said quietly. Elena looked at him sharply. "What?" But before he could answer, a gunshot thundered through the storm. The window shattered beside the fireplace. Glass sprayed across the cabin. Elena screamed and dropped to the floor instinctively. Victor moved instantly. Not wild, not panicked, precise. He grabbed Elena by the arm and pulled her behind a thick wooden support beam as another shot blasted through the wall. The men outside were shouting over each other now. "Burn it! Kill him! He's cursed!" Elena's entire body shook violently, not from cold anymore, from realization. These people feared Victor because they needed him to remain a monster. Otherwise, they would have to face what they themselves had become. Victor knelt beside her. "There's a path behind the cabin leading toward the river," he said. "Once we leave, do not stop running. You're coming with me." His silence answered first. Then he gave a faint smile. "That depends on your father." Before Elena could respond, the back wall suddenly burst inward. A flaming bottle smashed against the floorboards. Fire raced across the cabin. Smoke exploded toward the ceiling. Elena coughed violently. The men outside roared triumphantly. But Victor didn't panic. He stood slowly. Then, with terrifying calm, he opened the front door himself. The blizzard screamed into the cabin. Elena could barely see through the smoke and snow. Her father and 5 other men stood outside, holding rifles and torches. For a moment, nobody moved. Victor stepped onto the porch. Towering, silent, snow swirled around him like ghostly smoke. The villagers suddenly looked uncertain, because monsters were supposed to snarl, to rage, to attack blindly. But Victor simply stared at them with cold disappointment. And somehow that was worse. Her father recovered first. "You should have stayed buried in the forest," he spat. Victor's voice remained calm. "You should have told her the truth." The men exchanged uneasy glances. Elena slowly stepped into view behind Victor. The second her father saw her, his expression changed. Not relief. Fear. Real fear. "Elena," he said quickly, "come here now." She didn't move. His eyes narrowed. "That man murdered your mother." Victor said nothing. Elena stepped forward slowly. "No," she whispered. "I think you did." The storm seemed to freeze around them. Every man outside fell silent. Her father's face drained of color. Then rage exploded through him. "You stupid girl." His voice cracked violently. You know nothing." But Elena finally saw him clearly, not as a father, not even as a man, only as someone terrified of losing control. "You lied to me my entire life," she said. Her father raised his rifle slightly. Victor instantly lifted his own weapon. The other villagers panicked and aimed too. For one horrifying second, death hung over all of them. Then something unexpected happened. A low growl rolled from the darkness beyond the trees. Everyone froze. Another growl answered. Then another. The wolves emerged silently from the storm, gray shapes moving between the pines. 1, 3, 5, more. The villagers staggered backward in terror. Torches shook violently in trembling hands. "Oh, God, they're everywhere." Elena stared in shock as the wolves slowly surrounded the clearing, not attacking, watching. Their pale eyes reflected the firelight like spirits of the forest. Her father's breathing became frantic. "This is your doing," he screamed at Victor. But Victor never looked at the wolves. His eyes remained fixed on Elena's father. "You always blamed others for the evil you carried yourself." The wolves moved closer. One villager suddenly fired his rifle in panic. The gunshot exploded through the night. Instant chaos followed. The wolves lunged. Men screamed. Torches fell into the snow. Rifles discharged wildly. Elena ducked as one of the villagers crashed sideways into the burning porch. Another disappeared into the storm shrieking. Her father grabbed Elena violently by the arm. "You're coming with me," she cried out as he dragged her backward toward the trees. Then Victor moved, faster than Elena thought possible. He slammed into her father with crushing force, knocking the rifle into the snow. The two men crashed hard against the frozen ground. Years of hatred exploded between them. Elena scrambled away as fists struck flesh. Her father pulled a hunting knife from his coat. The blade flashed in the firelight. "Elena!" Victor shouted, but it was too late. Her father lunged. The knife buried deep into Victor's side. Elena screamed. Everything stopped. Snow swirled to the clearing, while Victor staggered backward. Blood spread across his coat. Her father breathed heavily, staring at the blade in disbelief. Then suddenly, a gunshot cracked through the storm. Her father froze. Slowly, he looked down. A dark stain spread across his chest. Behind him stood one of the villagers, an older hunter whose hands trembled around the rifle. Tears mixed with snow on the man's face. "That's enough, Mikhail," the hunter whispered. Elena's father collapsed into the snow, dead. Silence consumed the clearing. Even the wolves stopped moving. The old hunter lowered his weapon slowly. "We all knew," he said hoarsely, "about Sophia, about the lies. We were cowards." No one spoke. Years of fear and guilt hung over the storm like smoke. Elena rushed to Victor's side as he dropped to one knee. Blood soaked through his coat rapidly. "No, no, no." Victor grimaced but managed a weak smile. "You sound like your mother." Tears streamed down Elena's face. "You can't die." The wolves slowly retreated into the forest behind them, one by one, silent as shadows. The storm itself seemed to soften. Victor looked toward the dark trees. "For years," he said weakly, "I hated this village." He coughed painfully. "But hate poisons everything eventually." Elena gripped his hand tightly. "You're not alone anymore." For the first time in decades, the giant hermit's eyes softened completely. Not fearsome, not haunted, just tired and human. Weeks later, spring finally began touching the frozen taiga. The snow slowly melted from the rooftops. For the first time anyone could remember, villagers traveled openly into the forest without fear, not because the monster was gone, but because they finally understood there had never been one. Near the edge of the river stood two graves beneath tall pine trees. One belonged to Sophia, the other to the lies that destroyed so many lives. And beside them stood Elena and Victor together, father and daughter, at last. But the greatest twist of all came days later, when Elena opened a final unopened letter inside Victor's metal box. It had been written by her mother shortly before her death. Inside was a confession nobody expected. Not only had Sophia planned to escape the village with Victor, she had discovered something even darker. For years, several village elders had secretly used a monster in the forest legend to cover up crimes, disappearances, and smuggling routes through the Taiga. Victor had never been the danger. He had been the only man trying to stop them. And suddenly Elena understood the most terrifying truth of all. The real monsters had lived in the village the entire time.